I'm Lori Fair, and I'm going to tell you today about some church planning that I have researched. Will the church make it? What happens if we fail? What are we supposed to be doing? Are we sure we heard God right? Are we completely insane? Should we put our family through this? Can God be trusted? These are examples of some of the kinds of questions that have popped into your head and mine at some point during this church planting process. The good news is that church planting is God's idea, and He designed it to further His kingdom while we await His return. So tonight, I want to talk first about God's design for church planting and a brief history of it. And then second, I'll discuss three major hardships of church planting. And finally, I'll discuss effective principles that are needed to plant a successful church. God's design for church planting is to further the kingdom. Planting a church is planting the gospel. Number one, church planting is not a new idea, although it has been a trending movement here of late. We first see church planting modeled in the New Testament when the early church by the Apostle Paul. His mission was to make disciples and plant churches. Acts chapter 1 through Acts 28 tells us this. In America, we first saw the advance of church planting in the 18th century with Methodist leaders like John Wesley, Charles Wesley, and George Whitefield. Equivocally, the American Baptists of the 17 and 1800s saw significant success in church planting by taking advantage of the First Great Awakening, and pioneers taking it upon themselves to plant churches for the unchurched people groups of the New World. Now that I've discussed God's design for church planting in a brief history, I will examine some of the hardships of church planting. There are three among many, but three that I note here. Number one, the need to move too fast. Stephen Gray said in the book, Planting Fast-Growing Churches, every plant is a new adventure full of excitement and potential doom. They need to have nerves of steel and thick skin. Planting is long and challenging work. One pitfall is that any warm body will do when it comes to leadership, so moving too fast will oftentimes cause leaders to put someone in a position prematurely based on availability and not gifting or calling. Number two, burnout. A church plant, it can be lonely, slow, and difficult work. And so in an article from Christianity Today in February of 2011 entitled 7 Top Issues Church Planners Face, Ed Stetzer says, a painful reality of the early days of church planting is that core team members leave. Many planners report discouragement resulting from the loss of good friends from their core team. Losing half of the planting launch team within the first year is common among these churches, and because planting is hard work, you will get weary, and these volunteers will get weary, and you can't rely on your own strengths. So then that's C, you can't rely on your own strengths, talents, and giftings to plant a church. In an article written in August 19, 2020 called 3 Ways to Avoid Burnout in Church Planting, Kylan Lewis said, we church planners are an energetic and ambitious bunch, but our zeal can often lead to burnout when we're trying to plant churches in our own strength. Number 3, the switch from church plant to church planted. This is a very hard process. The process of the shift from church plant to church planted is described as a hard and treacherous road. We need to have strategies in place for when these times come. Strategic planning is needed more post-launch than pre-launch. Now that I've described 3 major hardships of church planting, I will discuss some effective principles that are needed to plant a successful church. Number 1, we need to be missionally minded. In the book, Planting Missional Churches, Daniel M. says, missional means adopting the posture of a missionary, joining Jesus on mission, and learning and adapting to the culture around you while remaining biblically sound. Think of it this way. Missional means living and acting like a missionary without ever leaving your city. The mission of the church body is to be a light and representative to the world of Jesus Christ. If He is still on mission, then so are we. Acts 13:47 says, for this is what the Lord has commanded us. I have made you a light for the Gentiles to bring salvation to the ends of the earth. Number 2, we need to realize the value of established churches taking part and not being afraid to ask for help. We can learn from the church planting ministry of Paul in the New Testament. The church at Antioch of Syria was extremely involved in the missional work of Paul and Barnabas. The church at Antioch committed to pray for them. They even sent word back, from time to time, mission team reporting back to them. Number 3, we need to remain flexible. Anticipate things going wrong. Reevaluate and adjust accordingly. Keep in mind that plan B may fail too. And number 4, it's time to be in the Word. Drawing from past knowledge of the Word is like trying to remember the words to a song you once knew. Be in the Word daily. Know the Scripture. Keep your mind focused on what is right. Today is the day of salvation. Share the gospel. Don't just invite people to church. Invite them to Jesus. In closing, I would like to read a quote by church planner Ed Stetzer. You can do a lot of things wrong and God can still bless your new church. All of us who have planted successfully will confess at times that God blessed in spite of our leadership and strategies, not because of it. So in answer to the questions I posed at the beginning of this speech, will the church make it? Did we hear God right? Should we put our family through this? Can God be trusted? God answers us in Matthew 16:18. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.